prep guide suggests that you need to know how to diagnose and correct problems with network services. That's all the services listed in the exam prep guide. In other words, it lists HTTP/HTTPS, which correlates to the Apache Web Service. SMB is associated with Samba, the CIFS file service. NFS is straightforward. The one Red Hat FTP service for Enterprise Linux 5 is the VS FTP server. The Squid Web Proxy service is straightforward. SMTP generally is associated with SendMail or Postfix. IMAP and POP services are associated with Dovecot. The secure shell is straightforward. If you have to diagnose a DNS service problem, remember the exam prep guide only requires that you know caching and slave name service. And finally, there's the network time protocol. That's a lot of services, so a detailed discussion is beyond the scope of this one video. But there are some general tips available. First, make sure the service is properly installed. And I've verified the installation of the Network Time Protocol service. Make sure this service is actually active. Uh-oh, it stopped, so that's not working. And that'll take a while, so I go to another console. And I check to make sure that service is set to start the next time I boot Linux. And uh-oh, it isn't. How do I get it to start the next time I boot Linux? This is the command described in another video. There we go. It's now set to start in standard run levels. You should also remember there are syntax checkers available for several services. For example, testparm checks the syntax of the Samba configuration file, which happens to not exist on my system. The httpd-t command checks the syntax of the Apache configuration file. Cool. For more intricate problems with a network service, start with appropriate log files. Verilog messages contain a lot of possibly useful information. There are service-specific log files available. Note the subdirectories with service-specific log files such as cups and Samba. To make sure there isn't a problem with network access for the service, you can try to connect to it via Telnet. For example, to test a SMTP server associated with port 25, I connect to the server on port 25. And look, that tells me that some SMTP service is properly connected to the network. If all else fails, you need to check the configuration files for the network service in question, using any clues you've collected along the way, especially log file messages. Of course, you should also check for blockages via firewalls. For example, you can check the current firewall configuration with the iptables-l command. That's an uppercase L, as well as any existing TCP wrappers protection. in the etc/hosts allow and the etc/hosts deny files. Many configuration files have commented directives and stanzas that provide a model for what works. Of course, there are some basic, well-known errors, such as in the main Samba configuration file, where by default the user/spool/samba directory is set as the print spool, which should be var/spool/samba. But that's a detail, and we've discussed this and many other possible network service problems in other videos, especially those related to the individual services described in the exam prep guide.